I think I finally figured out BlackRock's true purpose. Because the big banks have been controlling the world for decades before BlackRock came on the scene. Hundreds of years even. So what use do the big banks have for this new upstart company called BlackRock? Well, we've been doing a lot of research around this channel about how BlackRock works and what they are. And we've been learning how basically no matter where you look in the markets, BlackRock and Vanguard are the top shareholders of every company. And it doesn't matter what industry you look in, you're gonna find their names at the top of every list, even in competing industries like oil and gas and green energy. And all along, I've been working on a theory that there has to be some reason why BlackRock is useful to the big banks and the money that controlled the world long before they came along. And I think I figured it out. Here's a list of all the biggest banks in the US. JP Morgan is the biggest, and they control $3 trillion of assets. Trillion with a T. If you've heard of the S&P 500, what that is the 500 biggest companies in the American stock market. That's companies like Apple and Microsoft and Amazon, Tesla, ExxonMobil. This graph is showing all the companies in the S&P 500, and the bigger the box they have, the more money their company is worth. And Apple is the biggest one. All combined, the S&P 500 is worth $36 trillion. So JP Morgan alone controls assets that are equal to almost 1/10 of more or less the whole US stock market, because the S&P 500 is most of the US stock market's value. That's a lot of power that JP Morgan has. But then imagine all of these banks all having similar interests and kind of being buddies and kind of getting along when they eat up all the smaller banks and keep control of the world for themselves. Let's not forget that a lot of the most powerful banking institutions of today came out of power systems that long outdate the United States of America. So why did they let this company named BlackRock come along and suddenly start controlling $10 trillion in assets? That's right. BlackRock controls more than 3 times as much assets as JP Morgan Chase does. And BlackRock was only founded like 30 years ago or something. The answer can be found in what BlackRock does. BlackRock manages funds like exchange-traded funds and index funds, which most of our retirement money is invested with. Most of the money that BlackRock and Vanguard are playing with in the market is actually ours. It's actually our retirement money and our index funds and our exchange-traded funds. You know, these banks seem awfully powerful when you see numbers like $3.2 trillion. But what if I told you that we actually have more money than that? That's right. And our power has been on the rise lately. In 2011, retail investors represented just 10% of the market. In 2021, retail investors were over 22% of the market, reaching $7.2 trillion of capital invested. And that's just the money that we're actually investing for ourselves. Do you remember what happened to GameStop? Money that average traders are putting into the market right now is more than double the money that JP Morgan Chase has in the market right now. But hold on, because it gets juicier. US retirement assets total up to $33.6 trillion. And surely, a big portion of this is the retirement funds of really rich people. But don't underestimate the power of numbers. There's a lot of normal people like us. And when you put those $33.6 trillion next to numbers like $3 trillion, you start to realize that we have an awful lot of power over these markets if we were going to wield it for ourselves. Problem is, these funds with companies like BlackRock and Vanguard, they wind up controlling almost 30% of the assets in the marketplace. It's complicated, and it depends on which numbers you go by. Like, retirement accounts account for about 30% of the market. That's because a lot of retirement accounts are invested with things that are not stocks, like commodities or like bonds. But let me remind you that the S&P 500 is only worth $36 trillion. And if we weren't putting all of our retirement money away with a company like BlackRock or Vanguard, and we were the ones investing in these companies and then voting those shares because we were educated investors, it makes me wonder if we would vote to have people like the CEO of General Mills get paid $15 million a year. It makes me wonder if we would put up with our pharmaceutical companies pulling this kind of shit on us if we had a huge amount of voting power in those companies with our shares. But we're not, because most of our retirement money goes to BlackRock or to Vanguard so that they can invest it for us into the market and they can have all the share voting rights that goes with all those shares. And all these banks can keep being the biggest players in the marketplace and controlling how it all works. You know, I wonder how much all these banks total up to. Why don't we add up the top 8? Little math here, came out to this. This is in millions, by the way. Let's make it into trillions so it's easier to see. Divide that number by 1,000,000. And in total, the top 8 banks control $12.14 trillion in assets, all combined. I'm sorry, 12 trillion? Yo, you guys are small fish. We're out here trading. Power to the people. Do you see why I keep saying that education is the most important step?